Abortion in media and the biases. The debate in abortion is divided between two major groups, those in favor of abortions, known as pro-choice, and those against it, known as pro-life. The middle tends to accept abortions, but with regulations.
To begin with, let's talk about the extreme left. Some context behind this source is that it highlights the rise in threats and violence against abortion providers after Roe v. Wade was overturned. It cites incidents like vandalism, arson attempts, and death threats. The Mother Jones article fulfills key roles of media in society by informing the public, watching over the government's actions, and being a reliant advocate for voices. At the same time, the article demonstrates multiple forms of bias, including ideological, source, and emotional bias. The ideological bias is evident in the consistently pro-choice perspective used throughout the source. Additionally, anti-abortion activists are labeled as extremists and no opposing viewpoints are included within the source. Moreover, the source bias appears through the reliance on a single advocacy organization for pro-choice for all the data and expert commentary called the NAF. Emotional bias is reinforced through the charged language highlighted in the pictures to the right. Overall, even though the article effectively raises awareness and holds political decisions up to analysis, it reports from a clearly defined perspective shaped by overlapping media biases.
Next, we have the middle left, from a news source called Jezebel. It fulfills all of these media roles listed above by focusing on the recent lawsuit, Florida v. FDA, to refers to approvals of the genetic version of mifepristone, an abortion pill. It also underlines the issue's possible effects to society and critiques the government's decision. However, it mainly takes on an advocacy role since it persuades people to have more left-leaning views. Next, there are three main types of bias present within this article. The first one being statement bias. The phrasing, which can be seen in the title, is slanted towards supporting abortion rights, saying that it had another win. The next one is ventriloquism. They quote Liz Wagner, who works at the Center for Reproductive Rights, who was voicing her opinion on the anti-abortion movement, calling the opposing group hell-bent and the people trapped in states that banned abortion. The last one is political party bias. Throughout the article, left-leaning politicians are quoted to seem heroic, while right-leaning politicians are ridiculed. For example, on the left, Senator Josh Hawley's research about the abortion pill being unsafe is called a junk science study. These biases and the roles in this article could change the public's views on abortion rights by making them feel that abortion rights are necessary and making them willing to take action for mifepristone.
The center has two stances, one being pro-abortion with regulation and the other with no clear opinion. The current source from Morning Brew applies to the latter. The role of the source is most clearly informational and educational. It aims to inform the audience of policy decisions from both sides. The bias was more difficult to discern as the source was heavily reliant on polls and made little conclusive reports. Nonetheless, it did have biases. The structural and mainstream bias was in favor of pro-abortion policy wins, with issues clearly hiding popular buzzword topics like this court decision tied to Starbucks defending union workers fighting for abortion medication.
The article comes from the Wall Street Journal, a middle-right or lean-right news source according to Advantage Media on all sides. Rather than focusing on emotion, it represents abortion as a legal issue, shown through the representation of politicians like Arizona State Rep. The informative role is fulfilled by clearly explaining how different states responded after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, including which states moved to restrict abortion and which moved to protect it. The educative role is also present through explanations of legal concepts such as trigger laws, the role of the Supreme Court, and how states now have authority over abortion policy. The article also demonstrates an adversarial role by questioning the expansion of federal power and emphasizing constitutional limits and states' rights. However, the article also shows several biases. Structural bias appears because most of the quotes come from politicians and legal experts, not women or doctors affected by the laws. Gatekeeping bias is also evident as it limits pro-choice and medical perspectives. Political party bias is present through its focus on Republican-supported ideas like states' rights. Moreover, there is also concision as medical and ethical details are briefly mentioned or left out.
The next sources are from the CBN or Christian Broadcasting Network, which advocates for the far right for banning abortions. Although it takes an informative and educated role, it has a very clearly blatant bias. The first one is statement bias, where there's a clear and outright slant towards right-wing political actors. This ties into ventriloquism. The source quotes a study saying that 90% of inmates had abortions, of which they stated was connected to their descent to crime. However, though the study does say that, it also states that the connection to crime really came from deeper past trauma. In addition, there's an undue weight given to the data. The study was done informally in only 2 maximum prisons, both of which already had pre-instilled abortion recovery programs. The far-leaning media were very blatant in their biases, with the middle following with less obviosity. The left bias was in favor of the Democratic Party, which is because the party's general advocacy for government protection of rights and human equality for all. In comparison, the Republican right stated abortion as murderous because the Conservative Party held strong religious-tied arguments. Whichever side reaches the most audience will turn the most political votes in favor of a party. Even the center held some bias in favor of the left. No sources are always truly unbiased. It's important to understand the persuasive nature of biased media to prevent a democratic thinking country merging into a media-swayed mainstream thinker.